verse 1 because it has this like super high thing, but like the choruses are way easier, way smoother to sing, and way lower, then guess what? You run the risk of you never really get past it, or by the time you do decide to, abandon it and move on and come back to it, they're in such a tailspin about themselves and feeling so bad about themselves that the chorus that they knew cold, they're going to overthink the hell out of that and just, it's all going to be bad news. So if you can go somewhere else and build them back up and say, hey, let's switch to this. Let's just knock all the rhythm guitars out, for the choruses. Right? That's a softball. And then we'll come back to this, this tougher riff. Then it's a way bigger thing to be like, cool, we're almost home free. This is the last lap. Now we're on the end of this. It's a different mindset altogether. Absolutely. As an artist. And I think that's important, especially with vocalists. When you run the risk of like a physical limitation within a session, there are plenty of times that I'm just like, hey, is that like, I hear you getting hoarse, and be like, cool, we have that one epic moment at the end, the very last chorus. Let's make sure we go back and get that, because I have 2 takes of this, but I don't have anything of that. Yeah. And I want to make sure you still have enough gas in the tank when we do that before we go back and do all these other ones. Or if it's low stuff, be like, I don't want you completely hoarse and sounding like your voice is blown if you need to sound like really sensual and really like, really intimate and really clean for a certain part. Those are all great things to consider. So yeah, I think the 3 takes, having a safety in case one of the takes that you thought some weird noise or glitch snuck in there, happens all the time. And then reading the artist and where they're at and meeting them where they're at and trying to be that intermediary and say, ultimately you're capturing the sound, but also if you're producing or even an engineer and, and they're struggling, understand that and think about how you can help them. And is it just hey, let's take 5. Hey, do you need water? Hey, do you need, you know what I mean? Like, hey, this is awesome. This is the toughest part of the song. So once we nail this, it's all downhill. Mm-hmm. Like being that cheerleader, doesn't go understated, I think, especially if you can do it in the right way. It helps them know without saying it, like, we're on the same team. I'm not upset. Because a lot of times the apprehension is just, oh man, they're so pissed that this is taking so long. It gets into an I'm sorry mentality. It's like, dude, I do not care. This song's gonna be awesome, and that's a hard part to sing, right? Yeah. Just be real about it. And I think that's some really good advice.
And take the time to celebrate the good takes too. Like give somebody that confidence when they when they nail it. Because that's ultimately the feeling that you're chasing, is just like, yeah, you got that. That was awesome. That was so sick,
And I think probably like the last rule that like you should stick by is like get it right during the performance and don't rely on pitch correction or quantization and that kind of stuff as a crutch. Now, if that's like part of the style, great. But if it's the crutch and you're like, I can fix it.
Well, and even within like some of those like styles, like I'm sure like you guys found this on the metal record as well, and I find this doing pop production as well. Like, sometimes I end up playing things looser in like a pop setting because sometimes the artifacts and the glitches and the weird things that quantization or pitch correcting do can sometimes add to the color of a recording. But that's also to say that like computers are flawed. Like, they aren't going to get it exactly right. So the closer that you can get it sounding like what you want it to sound like during the performance, the more chance you have of successfully recreating that on your record.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and that being said, it can be a slippery slope too, where if you're just like, that was good enough. Right.
Yeah.
And then the next time it's good enough, it's a little bit less good. And then before you know it, you're just like, I didn't really hit that note. Well, now you're going to go and ask Auto-Tune to adjust a weird like pitch, fall off that's not even really a note. And that's going to be a much bigger ask. And there's no way to really like subtly address that. And I'm sure Tom, you, Adam, I've worked on plenty of vocal tracks where it's just like, this isn't even a note. Like we didn't even get close, and you just were like, okay, and at that point, there's not much that can be done. And if you don't have a couple of other takes where he at least gets close, or at least, at least they're like on a note and you can, punch it up to something, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're like, it's not great, or it's like there's not much that can be
not miracles.
Right. There's not much that can be done about it. And you don't want to leave that for yourself. So this is why generally don't walk away from a tracking session if you can with something that you're just like, I think it'll work, right? Like best practices are you can walk away from it when you can listen back to something before it's edited, before it's like heavily processed and still feel really good that the emotion is translating, right? Even if there's like a few corners that need to be rounded and it's like the engineer's like, there's no reason to go set that up again. Like I can nudge that a little bit. Sure, within the reason of time, use the tools that you have, right? Especially if it's not something that's completely taking away all the organic elements of it. But ultimately, you should be able to be okay to walk away and be like, yeah, this like raw mix from the tracking session, I'm into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm into the tracks, not like, hey, this sounds really bad, but you can make it okay, right? Like, I think knowing where that line is as an artist and then understanding that as an engineer or producer, being real with a client and saying, hey, we're going to need to get closer, or I can do this, but I also, I think maybe trying to reattack this song another day when you're not burnt out might be a better call ultimately for the project, and seeing if you can do that. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think that kind of wraps it all up. And next week we will continue to roll and run and get back into what happens if you do get to the end of tracking a session and you see a few of those spots that you do need to punch up a little bit, both literally and figuratively. But that's where we will leave it for this week. So thanks again for joining us, and we will catch you next week.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I just have to be honest and say this was probably one of my favorite episodes we've done so far. There's a lot of stuff in here that I wish I knew way earlier on, and some things that I know have directly affected so many of the projects that I've been a part of. So I hope you got a lot out of it, and if you did, please take a second and again, either review the show, go online, either on my website or at truelevelstudio.com/therecordprocess, and drop us a line, leave us a note, let us know what you thought of the show, let us know if there's other specific questions that you have, and definitely do not go anywhere, because next week we're continuing on to part 4 of our series on tracking, where we're going to talk about things like overdubs, punches, and using them not only to correct errors in the performances, but to also give you some creative room for mix decisions later on. So subscribe if you don't already to the show, and we will catch you next week on
The Record Process.